Oh, yeah.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting for Monday, September the 9th, 2024. I'd like to welcome the folks in the gallery and have to go through a few little housekeeping items. In case of emergency, there are exits where you came in and also 2 exits right here and next door. If there is some kind of emergency, then we exit the building and we muster outside in the parking lot in the front here. Hopefully that never has to happen. Also, washrooms, if you have to use a washroom, it's just down the hall and turn right at the end. And there's 2 washrooms there. They're impeccably designed to be handicap helpful, and but the doors themselves take a little bit of time to work, so just be patient. Other than that, welcome, and welcome for those who are tuning in at home. I'd like to take the opportunity first and foremost to recognize the fact that we are here today conducting our business on the traditional and ceded territory of what is now known as the Comox First Nation. Okay, so we have some delegations to kick things off. Craig Derrick Community Mums, Tara Orola, is that right? And a bunch of community mums are here to present information regarding a request for the development of a playground park area in the Craig Derrick community. Move receipt. And second. You can actually come sit, because I don't think the camera's going to pick you up over there today. It's acting up. There you go, and I'll get you. You're on the air as well as your interpreter.
Yes, right. I know. We're here for him, so that's why. Hi there, my name's Tia Ariola, and I live in the Craig Derrick community, and that is between Spindrift and Argyle, just south of the Kingfisher. And I'm here to request or move the conversation about a park, playground, trails at the Montrose Park area forward. Does everyone know what I'm talking about? Yeah, is that? Okay, great. I'm talking to you mostly. Everybody, how does this work? I'm a mom, not a politician, so thank you. So we're just hoping to get a park, maybe start with some trails in the designated Montrose Park area. Now it's about, what, 2 acres there, and they're scheduled to be a pump house eventually for the upcoming sewage system in that same area. But it's also meant to be on wetlands. And so there is some concern in the community about how that will affect the environment there, the wildlife there, and also how can we build on the wetland as such. So that being the case, would there then be opportunity to investigate and look into another area within the community? So it's been come down the pipeline that that maybe there was an area near Argyle, near the mailboxes at Argyle, that's I think been proposed in the past, where we could put some sort of park or playground or community area in order for community people to meet, to congregate, to come together, to share, to do all the getting together. So that's the gist of the delegation. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll ask some questions and some clarity, and Director Harbour, you're first up.
Yeah, thanks. And for the committee's benefit, I had suggested to Tia that she comes and present, because it seems like all of the good projects that we do in the areas often starts at the grassroots level and carries on from there. So, we've had some good experience in regards to playground as well when we received a delegation in Fanny Bay, which led to the new playground there, which is very much used by the community and appreciated right by the hall. And as the community knows, we also had a delegation later on around the Union Bay playground, and now we're about to put shovel in the ground shortly right by the ballpark for the renewal of that playground. So And I think I spoke to the committee 4 years ago that for me, I really envisioned those as, you know, in the rural areas, we often don't have a lot of infrastructure. And for people to be able to walk and bike to basic infrastructure is to me really critical. And I think it is to the communities. So continuing the march north from Fanny Bay towards Royston with playgrounds, I'm highly supportive of us looking at the opportunity in Craigdarroch. There's a lot of young families that have that live there. And as you know, that area kind of falls in between Royston and Union Bay, so they have to get in their car most of the time to get anywhere. In terms of the specifics, I would love, well, maybe later on under new business or at the next meeting, we could ask for a little report just to scope that, what could be involved in investigating this. I think that'd be a good first step, but I like that Tia mentioned both Montrose and Argyle. Montrose is a current CVRD park, and there's a lot of discussion, some concerns indeed around the wetness of the site. And there's also some consideration around a pump station. So that'd be interesting to see if that is a possibility, but I did go with some other residents, not Tia, to look at Argyle before. And Argyle is a beach access essentially, but it's a huge lot. Like it's a huge road access. It's very big compared to most road accesses. So I would be curious to see if that site has potential as well. And I guess the third site we haven't talked about is there's another beach access way north in Craigdarroch, but it's really narrow. So I don't see that.
The Amber Way access?
Yeah,
Okay,
I don't think that, but maybe a scope out would be what I would ask from the committee, and realizing that those projects usually take some time to gear up, but I really like the approach we took with the other two sites where we initiated committees in Fanny Bay and in Union Bay, and then to try to see if we can move something forward. So I don't know if my colleagues have comments but I would be really supportive of us moving in that direction.
Just for my information, is it all MOTI property? We have to get some kind of agreement with MOTI. We don't have any CVRD. We do have a little CVRD property there. The one that's slated for the pump station would probably be ours, right? So, yeah, rather than getting Mark up here, I think Director Arbor, do you want to answer that question? You know, probably look researched it, so.
Yeah, I can. I'm happy if Mark joins too, because Mark has all the knowledge around these initiatives and what it takes to get them done. But I would say from my information, Montrose Park is a CVRD park, so it's dedicated, whereas Argyle is still belongs to the Ministry of Transportation.
Now you've done it.
Yeah, great.
We'll turn this over to the CAO for introductions. Mark Harrison.
Sure, thanks, Mr. Chair. And Mark Harrison is our Acting General Manager of Community Services for this meeting here today. And I think, Mark, if you've got any kind of context around Montrose Park in particular, but typically with delegations, we do look for a motion from this committee to undertake research. And I think a summary background document might be an appropriate first step in this work. But Mark, if you had any context around Montrose Park in particular.
Sure, thank you. Through the chair. So Montrose Park is for sure a CVRD park that is owned, and there actually is a small little parcel beside it that's actually owned by the engineering department. So the engineering department is looking at the possibility of putting a pump station in that area. So and we're also looking at it as a potential park. So right now we're working on a biophysical report to better understand the site and how the hydrology in there works and what the ecological values are and whether it can actually support park infrastructure or not. So that's kind of ongoing right now, and that work's being done through the engineering department. The Argyle beach access, that is a MOTI-owned access. The one thing that I caution with that access is it is a provincial ARC site. So if we were going to do any work in there, there would be some substantial work that would need to be done.
That's some really good feedback. Oh, sorry, Chair. I can go. Yeah, really good feedback from staff, and Mark didn't disappoint in terms of his knowledge. I didn't know that work was already happening at Montrose around the hydrology and potential infrastructure. Maybe I was supposed to know, but maybe I just forgot. And in regards to Argyle, I still wouldn't put an X on it. I think, you know, I understand there's high potential for Arcside, but so does, I think even Monroe's is probably within that red boundary, right, in regards to cultural heritage. So pretty much anything that we do in Area A tends to be in the cultural heritage zone as soon as you're closer to the ocean. So, but I wouldn't necessarily, obviously that would require discussions with Comox First Nations and otherwise, but I wouldn't necessarily nix it because it is a larger site. And if what you're saying is that we'll get some hydrology in Monroe's, if that comes back really negative, then I think it would still be interesting to explore other potential sightings. So yeah, thank you for that information. So yeah, so maybe under new business later, if the committee is amenable, I would propose that we formalize an exploration of a playground in that area.
And you want to make a note on new business?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, Tia?
Where do we go from here?
Well, that's all gobbledygook for, we're going to take it from here.
Okay, that's it.
We're going to do a scoping study on it to see what is possible.
How long is that estimated to take?
Well,
Or when can we hear?
I may not be with you in those days to come, but we'll turn it over to your director.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. And you didn't have your mic on. So the question for those listening online is to ask how long a process like that takes. So Fanny Bay, I think we had a turnaround. I mean, usually staff will take the time it takes to do the investigation, which can be, you know, a few months. And then it's a question of funding and putting in our budget. So for both Fanny Bay and Union Bay, the overall timeline was about a couple of years to completion. So just to give you an idea, if everybody agrees.
And then plus pump outs.
The pump house is a separate topic. I won't comment on it this morning.
Good. Yes, exactly.
Okay, thank you very much. Excuse me from the table. And director, make a note to bring this up under new business. We have another delegation, though. Charles Shemerwin and Jenny Lamour, is that right? Lamour. I need that correction. Thank you. And a group here about safety issues on Highway 19A. If you'd like to come up to the table there, we'll take your presentation. Welcome.
I'm glad I'm sitting beside you. Actually, it was Daniel who suggested our committee come and meet with you all. Our biggest concern is road safety along 19A. So first of all, who are we? We're the Buckley Bay Mystery Beach Subdivision Road Safety Committee. Excuse me, I have a bit of a cold. And we're representing citizens that live along a 3 kilometer stretch north of the Buckley Bay Ferry Terminal to the Baines Sound lookout or rest area. Our goal is to reduce the speed limit from 80 kilometers an hour to 60 kilometers an hour. And our premise is all around human safety. Right now, the statistics indicate from the World Health Organization that chances of survival when hit at 80 kilometers an hour is a lot lower than if you're hit by 60, which probably really isn't hugely significant, but we've made a note of it in here because it's something that we believe is critical in sort of identifying the challenge we're faced with as residents that live along this stretch of the highway. We deserve roads that prioritize human life over speed. By reducing the speed limit from 80 to 60 kilometer hours, we can significantly decrease the risk of fatalities and make the quote oceanside scenic drive or Highway 19A safer for our community, for pedestrians and drivers. So the problem we're faced with, the residents who live along the stretch of road fear for their lives as they enter and exit along a myriad of road entries and highway or driveway entries onto that freeway. It's quite a challenge. And so we did send a letter to the Ministry of Transport in June 3rd, requesting that they take our request into consideration. And if you're looking, we've given you a handout, and Appendix 2 at the back actually identifies the letter that we sent to the ministry. The response that we received was rather dismissive and basically said, thank you very much for your comments. We wish you the very best. Have a lovely day. That did not really fuel our excitement, as we represent 196 signed petitions from individuals who live along this stretch of road. And that's not insignificant. And our role as the committee organizers is to make sure that we are able to make change that is going to make people's lives safer in this area. One of the biggest challenges that we're faced is where along this 3-kilometer stretch of road, there are 3 pedestrian crossings at the CVRD Joe Walker Park, 22 driveways that back onto the highway from Waterford properties, 7 major road intersections that enter and exit from Highway 19A, and also a ferry terminal access. So the challenge is that this is a very congested area. There's a lot of activity going on, and people use this as an artery to go back and forth from their other communities, and it's their major artery to their homes. So the committee went around and campaigned along the entire 3-kilometer stretch of road, and we received 196 signed petitions. Now, the petition is also in the appendix in the back. And this is 98% of residents in that stretch of road. And all of them are unanimous about changing the speed limit from 80 to 60 kilometers an hour. So the concern we have is we have been following what's been going on that section of highway, because we were aware that BC Ferries and their employees and WorkSafe BC have been working diligently for 2 years with the Ministry of Transport to try and create a safer section of road in front of the terminal by reducing the speed limit from 80 kilometers to 60 kilometers an hour. 2 years later, nothing. Apparently, they are working on something now because WorkSafe BC got involved, but it's still unknown as to exactly what's happening. That scared us. We're thinking to ourselves, our residents are going to have to wait 2 years to make a change, and this is not appropriate. So the question is, how do we speed the process up, and how do we get listened to? And this is where we have been working with Daniel on some random meetings to discuss how we might better approach this situation. And we've been working with our MLA, Josie Osborne's office, Daniel, and that's pretty much as far as we've gone. And Daniel's very supportive in suggesting that we go to Josie Osborne's office, because she does have clout in the area, and she does work directly with the ministry and has that capability. So there's some interesting facts here that when we asked the ministry to drop it to 80 kilometers an hour, they brought to our attention that according to the international traffic standards or national traffic standards, 80 kilometers an hour is the speed limit, but drivers will drive 95 kilometers an hour. At least 15, actually. So this further fuels our request to drop the speed limit from 80 to 60, because 60 is 74 or 75. So it's still a reduction, but it's definitely much safer. And offers some concerns, will probably satisfy some concerns if we can try to get this reduced. So I actually added on the very back as well, some statistics that were provided to us by the ministry that show that the increase in traffic has been over the last 10 years is 25% increase. But if you look at the graph at the bottom, it says, you'll notice the last 2 years had a substantial increase in volume. So volume of traffic is increasing and residential development is increasing, which means further congestion to this area, which means we should be looking at trying to reduce the speed limit sooner than later. Another very big thing is the CBRD's Joe Walker Park. Residents love this park. Children use it. They cross the highway to go and access the beach. Mothers with baby carriages cross to walk the pathway that's been set up there. There's a kiosk there with a place for people to cook and eat. There are 3 access points, one at either end and one in the middle where the kiosk is. And there's actually a parking area there. Very, very narrow access, but it's nonetheless an access to that park. Our concern is there are no real proper accesses to that park from the 196 residents that live close to it. And the challenge is, how do we create a safer crossing for them?
Also a passing zone all the way along there.
Yep,
So
we're getting that. That's true.
Would you, if you want to get up and address the board, you can get up as with the delegation, but we do ask that you let the proponent speak. Thank you.
So the current status of our petition is as follows. Josie Osborne's office, thanks to you, actually did set up a meeting with the Minister of Transport. We had a chance to talk to the director of highways out of Nanaimo and his team. He's an engineer. And surprisingly, we got some very interesting mitigative measures. However, speed limit was not on the table. And that's something that we are adamant about changing. However, there are some very useful things that have been added or have been offered. And they are a review of the current center line markings to update double line markings with additional no passing road signage. They will talk to the CBRD parks to provide a safer crossing solution, such as pedestrian crossing signs and greater awareness of the 3 crossing areas. They said that they would approach the RCMP to initiate more involvement in policing. They discussed the option of installation of a radar speed sign. And also, because we have cyclists, widening of shoulders to accommodate cyclists and pedestrians. Because at the speed of 80 kilometers an hour, the minimum width of that shoulder should be 1.5 meters, and it is not. So they are committed to making these changes. And that's a big help for us, and it's a very good start. I would say we've actually achieved in that one meeting. We had a couple of really good positive win-wins, so that was good. However, still on the table is lowering the speed limit. And to be honest, that's the reason why we've come here today to turn to this committee and say, we need help. We need your support to try and find some avenue of working with the Ministry of Transport to come to grips with lowering the speed limit. We're not sure how to do that, but they're very adamant about not doing it. However, we already see 3 communities. We've got Royston, we've got Union Bay, and we've got Bowser, all have reduced speed limits. When asked how that happened, the ministry said, oh, we don't know. It must be historic. Well, we'd like to make history too. So the challenge is, how do we do it? And we would appreciate your help. in coming up with some contingency to address this issue with them on our behalf and to see if there's a possibility that we can actually make this happen.
So you take some questions? Director Arbor?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And thanks for coming. And this is one of 3 groups that I'm aware of that's trying to improve risks on the highway. And actually, I'm really pleased to hear your update from the ministry around some of the things they're willing to look at.
Yeah, that just happened on Fridays.
Yeah,
That was
so Friday says fresh information, but that's indeed a really good achievement because I think essentially since they built Highway 19, there's been very little done to Highway 19A in our area to treat it a little bit different. People have the option at Buckley Bay to jump on the Highway 19 and in the same amount of time, you can get into Courtney as if you're on the lower highway. And I think you're right. Everybody tells me, and I experience it too when I drive, that, you know, the speeds are often 100, 110 kilometers an hour in that section.
Where's 19?
And I think the reason why I wanted Charles to come to the committee is we meet with Moti every few months. But I really think because residents keep coming, because the long-term solutions are not put in effect, and it's not our jurisdiction. But I think to demand a long-term plan around some of those key pieces of infrastructure, like that should be the purview of our committee. Currently between Union Bay and Buckley Bay, there is no safe crossing at all. There's nowhere that you can cross. Pedestrians and cyclists and families are treated to nothing. And even in Union Bay where you have the reduced speed, there's not really crosswalks or things like that, right? So I don't, and I'm open to different solutions. Like I hear you when you say your particular committee is interested in lowering the speed limit. But just last week, we had a head-on collision in Black Creek, right? And that was at fairly high speed, and that was in a 60-kilometer-an-hour zone, right? Where they have achieved the 60-kilometer-an-hour zone, but it still results in deaths once in a while.
60, 74.
No, I know.
Yeah.
But I think to try to think holistically around the suite of solutions, that's the kind of conversations, and this opening from Moti is encouraging to me. And then for our committee, like, are we ever going to try to create a service to help contribute to some of those solutions? You know, we don't, like, we mostly beg, but we've never kind of put money on the table to say, hey, we'll fund it. And that's happening in Royston. I was, you know, last time Kellen was here, I was like, maybe we can fund the same thing they have in Cumberland. Just, you know, what's your speed right now? And then we got some feedback. Sometimes people ignore it after 6 months, but that is a deterrent, and everything helps, right? So in terms of next step, it feels like maybe my item today would be for us to schedule a discussion in preparation for our committee of Moti coming to us. Because quite often we come up with our items on the spot, like Richard will make a list and they show up. But why don't we have like a discussion prior to them to try to see if we have some commonality around some of those asks as a committee, and then be open to see if we are also willing, whether it's be through the park function or otherwise, willing to provide some juice or some funding into some of those solutions if need be. It feels unfair because they're a huge ministry with huge budgets, but as we know, sometimes just putting a little bit of money on the table can help unlock solutions. So I really wanted to, go ahead.
I do have a point I'd like to make. We see the volumes of traffic increasing, and that is a serious issue. The challenge we're faced with is the Ministry of Transport makes a big deal about pushing the Oceanside Scenic Drive on 19 and along 19A. I think if we're talking about trying to quieten the area, it might be prudent to consider removing this signage and actually making it a moot issue, because what's happening is people are now, we've got increased tourism, we've got, which is creating increased traffic flow, and everyone wants to go along the ocean. The challenge is, if you want to go along the ocean, you know it's there. Do we need to tell them to go down to the ocean? I mean, it's on every major intersection sign on 19. And it's all the way along 19A, heritage this, I don't even know if that heritage phase still exists. But somehow at one time, that became kind of like the big caveat for 19A. And I'm not sure that that actually is relevant anymore.
No, if I may, I think that's a good point. And if I think about long term, what we'd like to see, like collectively in Area A, is something that resemble Qualicum. You know, like the way things are designed and the roads around there, it's still a great scenic road and there's still movement of traffic. They have that on the Sunshine Coast. There's many places that we can point at where they've had success in reducing speed while not completely like killing traffic inefficiency, right? And so, yeah, it'd be interesting because there's been very little work in the Comox Valley around that topic. And I'm glad you're here to encourage us to move forward with some solutions.
Yeah, I think mitigating.
Any of the directors have any other questions? Because we're running out of time for presentations.
I have a very quick question, and that is, what influence does a CVRD have over the Ministry of Transport on roads that travel through their region?
I'll turn over to staff for that question.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The CVRD, we do meet at a staff level fairly regularly on some of the operational priorities of the CVRD and trying to find ways to coordinate those activities with the Ministry of Transportation's work plans. The CVRD does not have a lot of influence in terms of those broader work plan priorities and budget setting at the ministry level. The ministry is considering the entire province, and so I don't think the CVRD's influence goes very far in those broader discussions. But we do try to have an operational relationship with the ministry staff, both local staff, excuse me, and at a more regional level. So I think like Director Arbor was saying, the ministry staff do attend these electoral area services committee meetings on a somewhat regular basis, and like I mentioned, staff are also speaking at an operational level. But to answer your question, the level of influence is not great. I think the ministry sets its work plan and has its budget, and we try to work at that positive and proactive relationship level with the ministry staff.
I will raise that issue of the Oceanside Scenic Drive simply because we have encouraged cyclists to come down to that road and cycle. And I wouldn't be caught dead on that road because it is dangerous. Those shoulders are way too narrow and drivers are going way too fast. And it is a recipe for fatality. So I'm just gonna say, okay.
Well, as director for Area C, I can tell you that the most dangerous pinch point I've ever seen is the approach to the Condensery Bridge. Because the road right away is maybe 30 feet wide and there's ditches on either side. But when we do meet with the ministry, we tend to go over the same things over and over. I can tell you that we had the same issue up at the Merville store in that intersection, Sackville and Merville Road. It's the second highest crash site in the Comox Valley on 19A. And I originally met with our MLA from a previous government, and then we met with the MLA on the current government, and then we just met again with Mike and a bunch of people from highways about that intersection when there was an opportunity, I think, when they did the repaving to maybe change it, because if you notice the Merville store accesses right onto the highway at 80 clicks. But, you know, it's doesn't hurt to try again.
I
we
find that a little bit abysmal, actually.
Yeah, I know. I'm just being realistic and
Well,
just give you my
so
experience as a 15-year veteran of this. That, you know, I do think highways are coming around a little bit to things like active transportation now when you talk about bicycle lanes and whatever. But I think, you know, to leave that with us again. And I think Director Arbor made a good point that normally when we meet with highways, it isn't re-scripted. I think if we have some, and I know Director Hardy has some very specific asks, some very specific roads that he's been banging the drum on now for a few years as well. So I do think that we can bring it to their attention once again. So I'd like to thank you very much for your presentation. Excuse from the table. And a vote on receipt. Any opposed? That is carried. Okay, moving right along, Advisory Plan Commission minutes for Area C. Oh, yes, don't forget the resolutions. Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the resolutions? No. All opposed? That carries. Okay, now is the Advisory Planning Commission minutes for Area C for receipt. Moving second on receipt. Anyone opposed? That carries. We want to wait for the director to get back. Yeah, we'll just wait a second. All right, so now we're going to plunge into a temporary use permit application for 46 Mills Road. Report for receipt. Move a second on receipt and over for introductions to this CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jody McLean, our senior planner, will be introducing this staff report. And I'll turn the microphone over to Jody.
Thank you to the CEO, to the chair and directors. So this is an application for a temporary use permit. So generally the zoning bylaw, it lists the possible general uses that may occur on a property, but an owner can propose a different use through an application which involves notification to neighbors and review by an advisory planning commission and is subject to approval by the elected officials. So this is the case here that we're reviewing now. And we have a residential zoned lot where the zoning bylaw requires a single detached dwelling be the principal use, and that is validly occurring here. However, the owners are requesting an additional use that is otherwise not permitted in this zone. A temporary use of a single recreational vehicle for residential purposes. In residential zones like this, the bylaw limits occupancy of residential vehicles to no more than 30 days. So that's not residential use. The applicants are requesting a 2-year allowance with the sole occupant being their friend who is awaiting some medical services. The applicants are here in attendance. And they can speak to their vision and their intentions for this. So previously, the Area C Advisory Planning Commission reviewed this application and supported it. Notification has been mailed to neighbors and advertised in the newspaper, and we received one written response, which is in your agenda package. But Mr. Chair, staff is recommending issuance of the temporary use permit as drafted in Appendix A. Thank you.
Any questions of the planner? Director Harper?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's interesting. This issue sort of made the news on TV last week. And I think we've talked for years that in response to the housing crisis, in the rural areas, the solution is not currently coming from government. It's coming from people that are arranging what are usually not considered acceptable housing. And I know the RDN just last week passed a motion to approach the province around tiny homes and RV to see if the regulations, provincial regulations could be changed in acknowledgement. It might be good for us as as a separate step to connect with RDN, because I think they're going to be preparing a motion for UBCM and such. So I like the fact that a temporary use permit, which is not super often used, is being suggested in this particular case. I'm supportive of it. Usually it's, so did you say it's for 2 years? I'm sorry. Usually they're like 3 years and then you can do one renewal. So is there the opportunity to grant a 3-year on the TUP?
That's correct, yeah. The PUPU can be issued for a maximum of 3 years. In this case, the applicants are requesting 2 years, but you can issue it for 3 years if you like.
Yeah, so I'd be supportive of 3 years and then you can do one more renewal. But in the interim, I think I mean, that's up to the applicant and the staff, but that's just my suggestion. Just save on the paperwork later, perhaps. And then another, the advocacy piece, which is separate from this application, obviously, I think we should stop turning a blind eye to the reality of what provides affordable housing in the rural areas and try to be proactive around, advocating to the province for more permanent solution. In the interim, bring forward the TUPs. I'm happy to to approve them. Thanks.
Any other questions? I can chime in a little bit that I attended the APC meeting where the proponent came forward and, he's in a position right now where he's waiting for some medical treatment and hopefully 2 years is a long enough extension to get to the point where you can actually have the procedures and recover from them and resume your life. But there's no guarantee. So my question is simply, if we do 2 years, there's always an option of reviewing it at the end of 2 years, correct? Just like there is with the 3-year exemption.
Correct, yeah. If they go for a renewal, it's a renewal of the same permit. It would have an additional whatever term length is in that initial permit. So either 2 years or 3 years.
Okay, so would the director be supportive of the 2 years at that, if that's the case? Okay, thanks very much. I don't see any other questions. So on receipt, anyone opposed to receipt? That passes with flying colors. There's a recommendation attached.
Addendum.
Oh, I'm sorry, there is an addendum. If you want to go down and make a motion to receive the addendum, it came in this morning, was it? Yeah, Friday. A second on the addendum. And if you have a chance to read it, it's right at the end of the meeting. Any questions about the addendum? So on receipt of the addendum, can make a motion? Oh, sorry, Director.
Yeah, no, I just want to acknowledge there is a resident that has spoken against the TUP, and I know there's hopefully that the applicant can mitigate some of the concerns after the TUP is issued. But I think for me, on most of those decisions, addressing accessible, affordable, secure housing in this climate, to me is more important than other concerns that are important as well, but not as important. So I just wanted to acknowledge receipt of that letter. Thanks.
So is that a motion to receive? And seconded? On receipt of the addendum or receipt of the correspondence, anyone opposed? Sorry.
You can call the question.
So that's on the correspondence. We're going back to the motion. Did you want to speak?
So.
Is that necessary?
And I wonder, Jody, if you want, I'm presuming this is the applicant. I'm wondering if you'd like to introduce the applicant and if the applicant wants to speak. I don't know that you need to go into great detail about the correspondence that's been received. It's
It's
part of the
been received,
consideration.
it's done, so.
But typically, if you, as an applicant, if you wanted to speak to the application at all, you're more than welcome to do that as well.
I think it's okay. I think Director Arbor framed it very well. Does the applicant actually wish to speak? Because you're welcome to come up if you want. But I think we're at the point of making a decision.
Just checking the audience. There's a
Anybody else in the audience have anything to add? Relevant to this case? Nothing? Good, then we have the recommendation and it hasn't been first and seconded yet, so. Moved and seconded on the recommendation. Very good. Any further comments, questions? So on the recommendation, anyone opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. And we're on to, where are we at? Here we go. Electoral Area C Development Permit, Commercial Form and Character, report for receipt. Moved and seconded and over to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, Jody McLean, Senior Planner, will be introducing the staff report for the development permit consideration. Jody.
Thank you, through the chair. So last year, the board adopted a rezoning bylaw that enabled the subject properties here to be developed and used as a campground. Its zone is in the commercial industrial section of the zoning bylaw. And that means that before a building permit can be issued, the regulations require a development permit be issued consistent with the commercial industrial form and character guidelines of the official community plan. So this development permit does not affect the operations of the campground. The applicants are here in attendance, and if there's questions on the operations, they can speak more to that. All this development permit can do is put conditions on the initial development of it and relating only to the rural character objectives of the official community plan. So in support of this, the applicants provided some drawings of the exteriors of the buildings, generally brown hardy board plank siding with a black metal roof. Exterior lighting will have to be dark sky friendly. And a perimeter buffer is being provided along the exterior lot lines that abut the public roads. And a thicker one with solid fencing along residentially zoned neighbors. The guidelines also require consideration of rainwater management, and a report prepared by a professional engineer was provided demonstrating that the perimeter campsites, they can accommodate their own rainwater without directing it to the neighbors or onto the roads. The interior, though, where the access roads and there are more clearings, they will drain southwards onto the speedway lot where a detention pond is being constructed to accommodate that. So concurrent with this application, the owners are also applying for a fresh water development permit relating to the impacts on some land alterations on nearby water courses. And as that development permit only adopts the recommendations of the professional biologist, those are delegated to staff here to review and approve. But those two development permits, this commercial one we're talking about here and that fresh water, they are consistent with one another. So Mr. Chair, staff is recommending that this development permit as presented here be approved.
Thank you, Jody. Any questions from the directors? Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I did get the opportunity to walk the site a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, maybe. And I think the campground design and site does make sense for that area. And I note that the area APC had some comments back, generally positive, but it's good to see that some of the issues that they raised are actually addressed in the report as well. And so I think it's, from my perspective and a form and character, this is good to go. And yeah, I have no further comments. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Director. And Director Hardy.
Yeah, thanks. The only real question I had that I didn't really see in the report was in regards to the containment of 6 ppdq, that's tar dust. And the concerns that a lot of residents have had in and around the area with regards to that tar dust flowing into the Oyster River. So just trying to understand the containment areas on the property, and is there a means for the proponent or the property owner to have some type of infrastructure that can contain that 6 ppdq? Thanks.
Jody.
Thanks. So the scope of this report is only addressing the campground. And it doesn't involve a significant amount of vegetation being accommodated around there. But in relation to the bigger picture and how it relates to the speedway and that the applicants in attendance could probably speak more to that kind of thing.
Director.
Not to be combative with staff, but I think we're all aware of the tire dust that ends up in and around the atmosphere that doesn't exactly stay within the speedway itself, and it does meander around the rest of the property. So that's why I brought the question up, is again, it is showing up in the Oyster River area from scientific studies and stuff. And again, if we can be more proactive than reactive, I think moving forward, I think would be helpful. So again, recognizing the fact that there are water flows going into the ditch and then heading into the Department of, or Modi's ditches, I think that's been identified. It's also been identified that there's going to be some holding areas that could contain sediment, etc. Again, just wondering if there's a willingness there to look at technology that could maybe address that concern with the 6 ppdq. Thanks.
I think Mr. Chair and Directors, as Jody noted, this particular development permit application is that form and character for the campground as Jody was noting. And so I believe your line of questioning is in a more broad sense. When we look at the requirements for this particular development permit, they are very specific to the conditions associated with that campground. And so I think that's where the report speaks to the different obligations and requirements of the applicant.
Director.
Thanks. Again, not trying to be combative, and I understand that we are talking about the RV park that's immediately adjacent to the raceway. And again, my point being is we are well aware of the fact that tire dust doesn't just stay within the confines of the speedway itself. I mean, there's dust that floats around probably the entire piece of property that's out there. So again, recognizing that there's containment areas with regards to stormwater management, etc. Is there a means of putting some technology that could maybe possibly address some of the issues of the 6 ppdq out there in that area? I just put it out there.
And if I could answer, I don't have that answer specifically on do we have that technology. I do know that when we look at our different regulatory requirements, we are seeking to be compliant with those. And if there was a regulatory requirement that we needed to be addressing, and if there was technology to be able to answer that, we would seek that out. But I don't have a specific answer for you on this particular situation.
Thank you very much. I will share with you that Jan von Stomp, who has a farm just off the connector through to Cumberland, has the Morrison Creek coming through his property, and they had a smolt die off last year, caused after it came right off the freeway, and with a big deluge of rain after a certain dry spell, it wiped out a whole bunch of the little salmon in the creek. So it is a real issue, but you have to remember that over 15,000 cars go across that Oyster River Bridge every day. So that's another concern. All right, so nothing more on that. We're still on receipt. So any opposed to receipt? Seeing none, that carries. And there's a recommendation attached. Moving second on the recommendation. Any more discussion on that? Call a question on that. Anyone opposed? That carries. I'm going to move right along to electoral area C. Where are we at? Agricultural Land Commission referral number 7391 on Howard Road for receipt. Moving second on receipt. And over for introductions, staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Stephanie Pollock, our planner, will be introducing this staff report on the ALC referral for Howard Road. Stephanie?
Thank you. Through the CAO to the chair and directors, an application has been received to consider subdivision of the subject property to create 2 new parcels. The present lot area is approximately 28.1 hectares. Proposed lot A is 25.3 hectares and proposed lot B is 2.8 hectares. There is 1 existing single detached residence on each proposed lot. The present and proposed use of the properties is residential, and the purpose of this proposed subdivision is to provide a residence for a relative, as per Section 514 of the Local Government Act. This lot is zoned rural ALR. This zone prescribes a minimum lot area for subdivision as 8 hectares, which this proposal does not meet. That said, the Local Government Act states that the minimum lot size for a parcel to be subdivided under Section 514 does not apply to agricultural land. So the minimum lot size requirement under the zoning bylaw does not apply. Regional growth strategy and official community plan policies discourage subdivision of land in the ALR for residential use and discourage fragmentation of ALR land so as to preserve contiguous areas of farmland. The proposed creation of a new ALR lot would increase residential density on agricultural land, and with added residential buildings and uses on each lot, detracting from the potential of future farming activities, and with no discernible benefit to agriculture. The proposed fragmentation of the ALR lot would reduce lot sizes and could limit potential farming use in the future. The Agricultural Advisory Planning Commission was not supportive of the proposal and opposed forwarding the subdivision proposal to the ALC for the following reasons. The Commission does not support breaking up a large ALR parcel. Maintaining ALR parcels allows for potential of future farming use. And the proposal does not meet the ALC's policies or the RGS and OCP regarding the protection of ALR farmland. The ALC Act prohibits subdivision of lands designated as ALR unless approved by the Agricultural Land Commission. The process requires the ALR subdivision application to be submitted to the local government. The board has the options of refusing the proposal or forwarding the application to the ALC with comments and recommendations. You'll note that there was correspondence attached to the agenda from the agent Evan Wind of Underhill Geomatics, who is not present at today's meeting. The property owners, Don and Beverly Fye, are in attendance in the gallery and are available to answer any questions should you have any. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions of staff? Does the proponent wish to come to the mic and speak?
Yeah, I'm not good at this, but Underhill is going to represent me. And it's unfortunately that he's out of the country. So I can't go very far on what he is thinking. I don't know if this answers any questions.
Yeah, we'll see if there's any questions from the directors.
Yeah.
Does any of the directors have any questions at this point? Director Harbour, you got a question?
Yeah, thanks. And I'm just confirming, maybe a question. They're all existing houses on the site, right? As per the map, it's not no new buildings. So I can understand how for the owners in Underhill, it can make sense. It's not added infrastructure. It doesn't add necessarily density. And they were willing to consider a covenant to make sure that that stays the same. So I appreciate the intent. But I think even with the APC recommendation and our knowledge, in the policy in British Columbia around keeping those parcels intact, I think that even if you got a referral from us, I'm almost certain it would be rejected by the Agricultural Land Commission, in my opinion. So, and I don't see sufficient reason, sadly, to proceed with that, partly on the basis, but also partly on the APC recommendations. So I'd be leaning on concurring with staff's analysis. Thanks.
Any other questions? My question is around the second dwelling. Who is currently staying there now? Is it a family member or?
The wife and I are in one, and my son, he's in the other dwelling.
So the idea would be to split the parcel away so your son would have the bigger parcel?
Yeah.
Okay, and you'd have the smaller one?
Yeah.
Okay, so there'd be no, I know they talk about increase in density, but my understanding is that we usually put a covenant on any 514 that stops a secondary dwelling, but that's been annulled by the province. Is that my understanding of that? We can't do that anymore. So we can still limit it to 2 dwellings, or would automatically allow a secondary on each parcel.
Ton True is our manager of planning services and can respond to that question. Mr.
Ron?
Good morning through the CEO, to the chair and to the directors. As Stephanie mentioned, that this application is on the Agricultural Land Reserve. If the board decides to move this forward with recommendation or no recommendation, staff would recommend that that the ALC has the decision on putting a 219 on it, because it's they're the senior provincial government who regulates ALR land.
So short answer.
Sorry. So staff would recommend that if there was going to be a 219 covenant on this property, is that we would like the ALC to have their final say on that.
Final say, yeah. I do agree with the assessment by Director from Area A that if this goes forward to the ALC, the chances would be extremely slim that they would approve it. I don't remember in my experience ever seeing it approved. So on ALC land. So you know, that's worth bearing in mind. Obviously, we could put it forward with for their decision, but I believe that we've been asked to be the gatekeeper on this because they are so overloaded with files already. So, you know, in the past, I would have advocated, you know, to send it through, but I do think that, especially under advisement of our agriculture advisory panel, that I as well will probably be voting against it. So thanks very much for coming to the table. I do appreciate it, and we'll excuse from the table while we take a vote on receipt of the report.
And that's it.
That's where the decision comes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Oh.
So yeah, this is a hard one for me because in past, I've always supported sending it through. Saying it's not our job, given the information and limit it to one dwelling per parcel. But, you know, there's just too many X's on this one for me, so I think I'm going to side with the APC. So speaking to the receipt, yes. Any other questions on receipt? All those not in favor? That carries. And we have the report or the correspondence for receipt as well. Move a second on the correspondence. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? That carries. Move a second on the recommendation. And speaking to the recommendation, Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. So even though I will vote in favor of the staff recommendation, I think, and it's not just comments for that applicant, but I think a lot of situations arise like that. And as Chair Grieve said, we do deal with it. And we tend to just stay focused on the matter at hand. But I know in Area A, when that issue arrived, I know that a lot of the time, the issue at hand is how families try to stay on the same property and also do succession planning at the same time. And I know there's other ways to achieve the same goal than subdivision in regard to, meeting the interests of different family members. I've seen that following negative decisions in my area. So it may be worth for the regional district to think about resources that we can offer in those situations so that people have awareness of alternatives to subdivision to meet their goals. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Important to remember that there are two dwellings. The only difference is we don't have two parcels. Any other discussion on the recommendation? Anyone opposed? That carries. Thanks very much. It's time to take a little leg stretcher, so I'm going to call a 10-minute recess. Thank you. Okay, I call this meeting back to order. And we are on item number 5, Electoral Area B Telecommunication Antenna System. Proposal, a report for receipt. Move and second on receipt and over to CAO for introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Alberic Margine will be introducing the telecommunications antenna system proposal report. And Alberic is one of our planners. So over to you.
Thank you through the CAO to the chair and committee members. A proposal has been received from staff by Rogers Communication about their intent to construct a 53-meter tall telecommunications tower at 1901 Larch Road. The subject property is received a letter of concurrence in 2021 to erect a 35-meter tall telecommunications tower, which has since been constructed. If a letter of concurrence is provided, this proposal will be the second telecommunications tower located at 1901 Larch Road. It is the policy of the official community plan to co-locate telecommunications systems. The proponents have indicated that a second tower is necessary to accommodate their desired capacity and height. However, the towers can share some of the same supporting infrastructure. However, they will be separated by 180 meters of distance. The subject property is 26.47 hectares in size and is dual zoned rural agricultural land reserve and tourist commercial 2. The property is located on the agricultural land reserve. As per board policy P89, the telecommunications antenna application and consultation process policy, the first steps for staff to draft a report to the directors to introduce the proposal. Prior to commencement of any public engagement, staff have assessed the application for preliminary consistency with the board policy. The public engagement will involve presentations to Electoral Area B and Agricultural Advisory Planning Commissions, as well as a public information meeting for affected residents of the neighborhood. They propose online public information meetings, which will be advertised in the Comox Valley Record and letters with information about the proposal and meetings will be sent to all property owners and tenants within 500 meters of the subject property. The applicant, Brian Gregg of SitePath Consulting, will be available for questions over Zoom. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Albert. Any questions from directors on receipt of this report? Seeing none, anyone opposed receipt? It carries. And the housing needs report in the electoral areas. Report dated September 3rd, 2024 regarding the final updated electoral area housing needs report for receipt. Moving second on receipt and over for introductions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Alana Malawi, our General Manager of Planning and Development Services, will be introducing this staff report and the presentation on our Zoom call. So Alana, over to you.
Thank you, James, and good morning, directors. As James notes, I'm here today to speak to you about the final 2024 housing needs reports for the electoral areas. These reports update our 2020 housing needs reports, and they fulfill our obligations to assess needs and supply under the amended Local Government Act. And we'll be bringing forward necessary companion amendments to the official community plan in 2025.
Pardon me, madam. Please, we're in session right now. Thank you very much for your concern.
The housing needs reports are intended to provide a picture of the current and anticipated housing conditions across the electoral areas. Each report includes area-specific data on your community profile, so your demographics, for example, your housing profile, so that's the construction and rental housing and market housing split, as well as a gap analysis. The regional report has also been prepared and supplements both these electoral area reports and municipal reports and will be presented to the board tomorrow, Tuesday, September 10th. A couple of things to think about as before I introduce Andrew and he goes through the reports with you. I would suggest that the current zoning in each of the electoral areas is in place to enable development of the protected supply requirements. And we are, as you know, making ongoing improvements to our internal processes to support the private sector to move market units forward. It's important to continue to stay engaged, of course, in regional affordable housing initiatives in order to address that supply need that is not so far met by the private sector and likely won't be. And certainly recognizing that rural residents will be looking to core settlement areas as they age to fulfill both affordability and their service need requirements. And then also to continue to invest in transportation alternatives across the region, both public transit and multi-use networks, given that transportation is the second largest household expense. I don't want to take away from Andrew's time because he's really got all the good stuff that you want to dig into. So I'd like to welcome Andrew Scanlon-Dickey back to this table. Andrew is the housing manager, as you know, with Turner Drake and Partners Limited, and has served us very well, both in this round, updating our reports and in our previous work. Andrew will present his findings and his analysis and then be available for questions that you might have. So thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much. So I guess mic check just to make sure I'm not
You're
too
coming.
loud. Coming in. All
We hear you
right.
now. Yep.
Perfect. Fantastic. And then for just so I'm sure, would you like me to share my screen or is it controlled on your end in your room?
You can control it, I think.
All right. So that's the case. I am just going to share my screen here quickly.
How do we ever exist without Zoom?
Right. It's saying here, if I share my screen, it will stop sharing other screens. So I just want to make sure that you are okay if I do this.
You're good to go.
All right. Excellent.
I have it on the highest authority.
Excellent. All right. Perfect. Excellent. So I imagine in front of you now, you see a PowerPoint presentation or a PDF, which says Housing Needs Report, Electoral Area Services Committee. I have not heard a
Yes,
no,
that's
so
correct.
excellent, perfect. My apologies, getting through all the technical requirements for a Zoom meeting. So thank you, Alana, and thank you everyone for having to listen to me once again. I believe our last presentation was in about May. And so this presentation itself is going to be in many ways a repeat of what I gave at that point. However, there have been a couple things that have changed since. There have been new updates to some of the data. For instance, the province released more or updated projections in June. Some of the projections for the electoral areas have changed. And also, and I'm going to go into it a little bit in more detail, is we've received more guidance in terms of how to perform those demand projections for the electoral areas. So just to give a little bit of context yet again, so in 2020, the CVRD produced housing needs reports for each of the regional districts communities, including each electoral area. And Turner Drake, being our company, belonged to the team that produced these reports. And so in 2023, Turner Drake was hired once again to perform an update specifically to the data work. The reason being was that there was new census data, the market had changed, and market data was available to reflect that change. So it made sense in evolving times to have a better outlook or a better snapshot of what's occurring locally. So as we've made reference to in past documents, so the first legislative requirements for housing needs reports were introduced in 2019. And so that's what initially kind of sparked that first housing needs report. And then in late 2023, Bill 44 introduced new requirements, which are included in the reports presented to you and what we'll talk about briefly in presentation today. What's most notable about those new requirements is that communities must now use a standardized approach that was introduced in June 2024 to identify 5 and 20-year housing demand, among other less technical requirements. And another important note is that for this work, the Denman and Hornby Island local trust areas were not included. This is to follow the methodology that we performed as part of the 2020 work. And so if there's any questions related to those areas, I'm happy to try and answer, but I wouldn't have them immediately readily available. All right, so similar as to our last presentation, we'll talk a little bit about the state of the market. So I apologize if things are a little repetitive. Then we'll go into those demographics, and I'll identify a little bit of where the changes have occurred from the previous presentation to now. And then we'll get into a conversation of those demand projections as prescribed by the province. So the electoral areas experienced higher housing price appreciation between 2019 and 2022 than the CVRD's municipalities. On average, there was 87% appreciation of local homes during that period. So when you see in the chart before you is that from 2010 to about, let's say 2016, while there was growth, it was more along the lines or following inflation. But then from 2016 to 2019, it started to ramp up. And then from 2019 onwards, there was a significant jump upwards for all 3 electoral areas and as well for the other communities of the CVRD. But when we're talking about affordability, oftentimes an easy thing to do is look at the price of homes, and then it's like, okay, well, affordability is becoming less affordable because prices are increasing. And while this is generally true, it's important to understand the change in prices relative to the change in incomes, as well as other mortgage assumptions like interest rates or mortgage inputs like interest rates. So to map out how this kind of relationship has changed over time, we looked at the gap between what can be afforded by the median family income and the median purchase price that exists in the market or has existed in the market over the last 10 years. And what we see is that looking at the chart before you, that solid blue line, that is approximately what would be affordable to the median income across the CVRD. And because incomes haven't really changed much over the last decade, they have increased a little bit, but not tremendously. The amount of home that a household or the median household can afford has also not changed. But at the same time, we've seen these growth in prices. And so that gap between what is affordable and what is available is widening from year to year. This seems to be even more so in the electoral areas, with median home prices more than the CVRD overall, as I mentioned. Electoral Area C was reporting the lowest median at $937,700 in 2022, versus $769,000, about that amount for the totality of the CVRD. So overall, there's an increasing gap between what folks can afford and what's actually available. When we talk about renting, particularly in the rural areas, we unfortunately have very little data to talk about what is occurring both in prices and vacancies. However, we can look to adjacent communities to understand if things are occurring in those communities. They may also be shifting or evolving locally. So for instance, if we look at the Courtenay census agglomeration, which is the city of Courtenay, as well as a collection of areas that are considered as kind of like commuter shed, we can see that the solid blue line on this chart depicts that the vacancy rate for the total rental stock, as defined by CMHC, the total vacancy rate was less than 3% from 2013 onward. Industry standard is that 3 to 5% is a healthy vacancy rate. So anything below indicates that there's an imbalance of power between landlords and tenants, specifically that landlords, tenants have less choice, less is available to them, and so they often have to succumb to greater prices that landlords can then charge. So what does this mean in those areas? Well, if folks are faced with lower vacancies in the municipalities, it means that those tenants or prospective tenants are looking for alternatives, and those alternatives can be found both locally in the municipalities, but also in adjacent areas where they might choose to commute from. And so as more folks move to rent in the electoral areas, that means vacancy rates are pushed down, and then prices for rents are pushed up. And so that's there starts to become a little bit more of a gap between what can be afforded and what is actually available. Although this is more from inference, not necessarily from data that we can have available to us. Another thing to talk about, and this is important just because it's a growing issue in many communities, though we don't necessarily know the exact impact it has on communities locally. Short-term rentals are growing, and they continue to grow. So the totals for the electoral areas expanded from about 575 in 2019 to 884 in 2023. And alongside that, we've also seen a rise in what we've estimated to be commercial short-term rentals, growing from 354 to 540. A commercial short-term rental is one that is available more than half of a year. So it is perceived to be used more as a commercial use rather than as a residential long-term, place of residency. So what a commercial rental or the number of commercial rentals can indicate is kind of like that upwards number of how many units may be available otherwise if those short-term rentals were not used as short-term rentals, or used rather as long-term tenancy. We say that's the upper amount because we don't know exactly how many of those would actually convert back to a rental, or if they would just go on to the regular market, or if they wouldn't have been built otherwise, if they are new. So overall in 2023, about 61% of electoral area short-term rentals may have been used or may be used commercially. And we see that this kind of relationship, while there's more short-term rentals available in electoral area C, that relationship is about the same across each of the three. All right, so that's kind of what we're seeing in the market, but what are we seeing from the demographics, both historically and what we anticipate over the future? Well, in 2021, the estimated electoral area population was about 21,850 people. And I want to mention again, this is not including the Island Trust areas. And this is up 6% from 2016. Projections for the electoral areas suggest that the total area may grow another 15% by 2041, or about 3,270 people. For those of you who remember the last presentation, this amount was actually anticipated to be larger with the previous provincial projections. So for instance, electoral area C was approximately 2,200, something like that. So there's been a drop in what the province is anticipating populations will be in those rural areas, specifically the electoral areas of the CVRD. But what we're seeing, or what we anticipate to see for each of these communities, is that growth could occur across different age cohorts, or really most age cohorts. So whether it's seniors, so those who are 65 plus, or even family-aged individuals. The source of the change, well, recent anticipated regional growth trends, they are largely driven by considerable interest from outside the CVRD to move to the CVRD. And as I mentioned before, this is more than enough to counterbalance natural population losses. So the chart that you see before you, the dark blue represents that, that net change in births and deaths in a given year. So you see that's starting to be much more in the negatives, which is more trending with aging populations. But everything above that is indicating, so you have the green, the orange, and the red, largely indicating that there's in-migrations of folks from outside of the province, from inside the province, and from international sources. While higher shares of this in-migration is directed towards municipalities, the electoral areas are definitely not overlooked in this trend. The electoral areas and municipalities are, as you know, deeply connected, so a household's location choice is often not specific to one community. And to illustrate, in 2021, about 6% of the electoral area population had not lived in their respective electoral area 1 year prior, with the greatest portion arriving from elsewhere in British Columbia. Disclaimer on this, it does include folks who may have moved from an adjacent electoral area, but what it does also mean is that there's a fair amount of mobility locally, or coming from outside of those local jurisdictions. All right, so that's kind of what we're anticipating in terms of population. What are we anticipating in terms of dwelling demand? Well, using the provincial H&R method, which is the housing needs report method that was introduced in June 2024, we can estimate the total number of housing units required over a 5 and 20-year time frame. And this projection is made up of 6 components. One, it's demand based off of units needed to address extreme core housing needs, so those who are at the most vulnerable in the community. Units to address homelessness or estimated rates of homelessness. Units to address suppressed households, anticipated growth, to address vacancy, shortage of vacancies. So how many units might we need to get back to that 3% based off of some assumptions set by the province. And then as well, something deemed as the demand buffer, but this element only applies to the municipalities, or to municipalities. So in total, and what you may have noticed so far is that in the previous presentation, I have been talking about like 2023 and 2028. So basing these projections off of like the most recent complete year. The H&R method does require that we use the baseline of 2021. So that's why I have been talking about the 2021 population and its projections forward. So in 2026, that 5-year projection, the calculations anticipate that there may be demand for 1,453 units across CVRD's electoral areas, and then 4,692 units over the next 20 years. 2 things are very important to note here. So recent conversations with folks at the province indicate that that 5-year projection is more of a legacy item. So it's there because the previous H&R requirements were that we reported the next 5 years. What they're really more interested in is that 20 years. And the second important element here, and as you may have noticed, is that that 4,692 units required by 2041 is higher than the population that is anticipated by 2041. And the reason for this is, well, there's various reasons, but the biggest thing is that what the province is trying to do with their projections is move to a future where affordability is back to historical levels. So what that means is that oversupplying or providing more supply to the market so that there's more options for residents, both who are incoming or who already live in said market. And then if there's those more options, greater supply, that's keeping up with demand or surpassing demand, that means prices will go down. And so that's why in many communities, we see that these growth in populations are not as high as growth in dwellings or dwelling demand. So when we look at it from a electoral area point of view, what we see is that there's demand for each of these communities. So electoral area A by 2041 may require 1,245. Electoral area B may require 1,484. Electoral area C may require 1,963. While these numbers look precise because we're not rounding it to the nearest 5, I do want to indicate that we're required to have it to the nearest 1 or have it at reported by the specific digit by the province. That said, these aren't the most precise numbers. Even the province has indicated that their method is a high level and it's more meant to provide targets, not necessarily to be exactly what's anticipated. Something that we are also required to do, but it's not prescribed by the province, is turn that number, that total number of 4,692, into what we might anticipate in terms of unit sizes or what we demand for unit sizes across communities, as well as different forms or different housing forms, be it market housing, affordable housing, or deeply affordable housing, as we've described it. And so the chart that you see below describes, at the bottom, you have the totals of each of those market, affordable, and deeply affordable housing forms. So while the market might provide most of the units or might provide for most of the demand of units over the next 20 years, there is still quite a considerable amount of units that should have some form of non-market intervention. So for instance, affordable or below market units, there could be about 967 demanded over the next 20 years. And for those deeply affordable, like transitional targeted housing, there may be closer to 267. And these are estimates based off of local incomes and what is deemed as a very low or low income. And those individuals with those incomes are deemed to be at most vulnerable of facing financial challenges related to their housing. And then what you also see here, for your reference if you're looking at this later, as well as if you're looking at the report, is that the unit distributions or the unit size distributions for each type of housing are different. So for market housing, based off of more preference, it's looking at larger housing forms, so the more of those 3 or 4 plus bedrooms. But when you're looking at affordable housing, deeply affordable housing, typically smaller, more affordable options, meant to more meet the needs of individuals and unfortunately not as much of the wants. All right, so takeaways. Obviously, prices are dramatically increasing, and while the increases can be largely attributed to local supply and demand dynamics, a notable portion is also due to factors outside a community's control. So for instance, a pandemic happened, interest rates shot up, interest rates went down, fluctuated, inflation also occurred. So all these things weren't obviously within the control of the CVRD. However, what is largely within control of local communities is their capacity to be flexible in the provision of several forms of housing. So allowing broad forms of housing typologies increases opportunities for the market to add inventory, helping to slow down price pressures. So that's where the province is looking for those increased supplies over that 20 years. However, Regardless of how much is built, it's important to recognize that there will always be many households that cannot afford the typical home provided by the private market. And so non-market interventions are increasingly necessary to equitably house residents. However, density, which is often the form chosen for providing these non-market interventions, is complicated in unserviced areas. And it adds difficulty to providing that appropriate housing. And so housing goals should be approached regionally. Yes, so with that, I end the presentation and I open the floor to any questions, whether it's kind of changes from the previous report to this one or just general questions about the process, open to anything.
Thank you once again. Little ray of sunshine. I see the directors are mulling something over here, but yeah, you did mention the fact that how difficult it is to build in the electoral areas, especially any kind of density, because we don't have control over things like a subdivision process, rainwater management issues, all the kind of stuff that we face out in the rural areas, plus the fact that at least in Area C, very large portion of Area C is in the ALR. So that makes it further complicates this, and it's a challenge because it focuses any growth on a few growth nodes that we have. But then we have challenges around moving those forward as well. So. Anything new? Director Arbor has a question.
Yeah, thanks. It's also sobering right now, to watch that figure of 100%, 104% property increase in Area A in value over the last 5 years. And incomes are virtually stagnant and the price of everything else has gone up and people are feeling tight and frustrated. And that's not just true here, it's true across Canada. And then you look at Canada itself standing out so badly compared to peers around the world where the housing market has not exploded like it has here in terms of value. And we have a totally broken country somehow. It's just horrifying, really. And it feels like 5 years this board had urgency around housing, but we were hoping that maybe the conditions would improve and it just worsened. And it's really, I don't know, it's really demoralizing. I was at a political event this weekend and, I being asked to talk about the provincial and the federal election and the difference in the housing platform between parties. And I think my best answer to people I was with was, all of the platforms are hopeless. None of the party has solutions, right? It's, it's really puzzling. And on the way back on Denman, I was talking to a young resident, who just like no hope in sight for her, like in her 20s, and just to try to get any kind of housing. She currently lives basically in a shack, was raised in this region, and there's just no hope. So, yay, there's me being, realistic about what's out there and the impacts of the housing crisis. In regards to this piece of work, that obviously this term I'm increasingly becoming less of a regional person and more of an area person in terms of my area. And I do get worried about when we talk about a lot of the solutions will be found in the core municipalities. If the report shows that we have the need for 67 homes in Area A that are deeply affordable, I don't see the Comox Valley Coalition advocating for projects in my area. I don't see how having focused everything that happens at the regional district is in the municipality. And 67 is not insignificant, plus 400 affordable housing. So as we're entering those regional housing conversations, so far, I have not seen, I've seen mostly a very municipal focused take on the housing issue and our collective work. And I've always been, you've heard me for the last 6 years, I've always been happy to spoke regionally and recognize the importance of affordable housing stock in the municipalities and that a lot of it will go there. But I'm sorry, it's not like there's zero need in the area should be ignored when it comes to advocacy around projects in the areas. And I actually don't think that this board is, the CVRD board is going to be supportive of projects in the areas. So it actually weakens my desire to be part of the regional housing service. Maybe think about crafting something that's more area specific. I don't know. We're breaking ground on Hornby after 6 years this fall on the Beulah Creek project. And there was some support, but the support came through this committee. It was done totally outside of the regional effort. And Denman is facing the same thing. I just wrote a letter of support for the Denman project over the weekend. And again, I'm not seeing a lot of, in our regional housing function, even awareness of those projects. So I think as a committee, like if we want to support the areas, yes, there's a regulatory, like we saw the temporary use permit earlier around an RV. That's where things are at. That's the reality of where people are at right now. And then if we can hook the province and the federal to create some secure housing, that's great. And there's appetite, but the overall picture, I don't know. I just not hoping for a housing crash, but those prices are so out of reach for families. We all feel powerless. And so, you know, a lot of the time I'm just showing empathy, which is not great as a politician. You want to bring solutions to the table, but yeah. Thanks for listening. Anyways, if anyone has good ideas of how to move that report from data to action, I think that's where it needs to be, but I'm still not seeing any easy pathways in terms of the actions.
The great ship of state that will not be turned. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about people living in RVs in the rural areas. There's another RV park on Coleman Road that is on ALR land that's not supposed to be there. They just moved in porta potties and a dumpster, and you know they might be applying, I don't know, for TUP coming up to operate temporarily. We have a few of those as well, but we don't make it easy. We're our own worst enemy, really. I mean, we can't. People are trained a certain way. They can't think out of the box, and that's precisely what we need now: is somebody to think outside the box. A member, I guess, am I allowed to free talk here? But a member of my area planning commission said, I guess he's got kids, right? And the kids want a place. They can't afford $1 million for a house in Area C. So he said, why don't they create? And I guess, again, it would have to be in the municipalities because they've got the service thing to do it. But why don't you let the kids buy, you know, something they can afford, like a $250,000, $300,000 pre-manufactured home and put it on have a designated manufactured home park, like a trailer park in the modern world, and allow them to build equity, rent the pad and build equity in their house until they can afford to buy property or something like that. Well, I thought that makes too much sense. That's perfect, you know, but you can't do that in the rural areas. You'd have to do it near the services. So again, there's of little value to the electoral areas. I can tell you a house just went up for sale a week ago on Rennie Road. It's a nice house. I know the guy that built it. You know, it's on, I think, 7 acres. 19.5 million. No, 19.5. So 1,950,000. You know, for a house, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, big deal. I mean, it's I have to say, it's a lovely area. I'm glad I live there, but I've got probably the smallest square footage of anywhere on that road. So, I mean, when you ask the realtors and talk to the mortgage brokers and stuff, you know, one of my friends said, you know, the people moving here don't need a mortgage. They bring their money with them. So they're not trying to, it's the people that are both working dead out, trying to get, you know, into a $600,000 house. They have 100,000 saved up. They're both working like crazy. And it's still, you know, you're talking about nearly $5,000 a month. Well, how the hell can you do that? You know, I mean, these are bigger questions than we were able to answer here at this table, obviously, but we can at least express, you know, the concern to higher forms of government. And there is a sense of urgency. There is a real sense of urgency. And we all know that all the other social issues are related to housing. Housing's key. We know that. But like you say, we're going to start a housing commission or some kind of a, you know, is it going to be, again, centered around the municipalities? You know, what about the 967,000 homes needed by 2026 in the rural areas? You don't even have that many carpenters to build that many homes. So, you know, I don't know, but we need some creative thought, and we need to instill a sense of urgency at the local government level. I think that's missing. And we're going to talk about economic development. And coming from the building supply industry, I can tell you that economic development in the Comox Valley has traditionally always been around housing and building houses. Always. We used to have a way of gauging the activity by how many 3-inch framing nails we sell in a week. If you had to order 2 skids of 3-inch framing nails this week, then you know there's a lot of boards being banged up out there, you know. So it was an unofficial way of having a barometer on the community. But we're not going to make Andrew listen to all this stuff. It's he's got things to do, I'm sure. So any closing parting words of wisdom from our directors or staff? We're on receipt. So I'm going to call the question on receipt. Anyone opposed? Seeing none. We have the recommendation as well that the report is published on the Comox Region website.
Yes, so
moved. Second, and speaking to the recommendation, Director.
thanks. Maybe for staff, like something that we keep delaying, which I'm fine with because we got a lot on the go, but the rural OCP process, I think we're going to kick that eventually. And I'm sure that this sort of information could be fed into it. So what is staff's really thinking, or if you have an update on anticipation of the NOCP update and how this kind of really rich information, because it's actually a lot of work that's gone into this, could feed into that process.
Through the chair to the directors, we have a requirement to update the rural official community plan by 2025, the end of 2025, to incorporate this data. But I think there's a number of pieces that we could go in and update to kind of reflect the analysis around this report. I'm not suggesting that staff certainly will take your direction, but staff isn't anticipating a full scale review of the OCP in 25, but certainly to accommodate this material, yes.
Well, I think we're at the point now where we're going to vote on the receipt as it's laid out, and the our recommendation as it's laid out on the agenda. So, anyone opposed? And that carries. And as I say, this leads into rural economic development. moved and seconded on receipt. And over to CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jake Martins, our General Manager of Corporate Services, will be introducing the staff report on the rural economic development service feasibility and some work that we've been pursuing with the Comox Valley Chamber of Commerce. Jake.
Thank you, James, and good morning, committee members. Yes, so as James has noted, this report responds to some interest that's been received from the electoral area directors in regards to the potential establishment of economic development services in one or more of the electoral areas. I'll note that, of course, right now outside of Denman and Hornby Island, the regional district does not have a economic development service. As in 2022, that service, sub-regional service, was amended to focus on tourism only. Economic development services and activities vary widely, but commonly include tourism promotion, business retention and expansion, business investment and attraction, market and community research, education and training, support or programs for specific sectors like the agricultural sector, technology, retail, and so on. A number of private, public, and community organizations and agencies currently provide different forms of business and economic development services at both the local, regional, provincial, and sort of macro scale. Local governments are also part of that mix, as in general, the majority of communities in the province do provide some form of economic development services. The province undertakes a periodic survey of communities around their economic development services. We've attached the most recent one, which was from 2018, to this report. And it just provides a high-level summary of some of the approaches, some of the services, delivery mechanisms, priorities, challenges, those types of things. The survey findings, as I noted, they outline both the kind of delivery mechanism that can be taken, but also the services that are provided. And there are several considerations that the committee or the regional district would need to take into consideration. Those include both what are the services you'd want to provide, how you'd want to deliver them, and then also determining the key mechanisms that would form part of the bylaw that would establish that service around service cost, service governance, service control, and delivery. A feasibility study is typically the method in which these types of matters are explored, but these investigations are often commensurate with the complexity and the scale of the service being provided. So it's not a requirement in all cases, but certainly can be helpful, and we've noted that in the report. We also have to contemplate the service establishment process, which in this case, we've noted that there are some special considerations for economic development provided in the Local Government Act that enable you to essentially, if chosen, to establish the service through director consent, if it's provided with a few key considerations. Aligned with this exploration, staff have become aware of the ongoing initiative of the Chamber of Commerce, as James noted, and some survey work that they're undertaking in Electoral Area C. And so through this survey, they're seeking to help understand the challenges the business community is facing, and they can then help guide some of their response services that they provide. Tracy Clark, who's their executive director, I believe may be on the Zoom call. And so if the committee has any specific questions for her in terms of that work, by all means, I think she's available to answer those. Concurrent with this matter is the CVRD's ongoing work around an agricultural plan and tourism strategy, and these are viewed as significant inputs into this topic. And for this reason, we're recommending through this report that we receive the results that are coming out very soon from the Chamber of Commerce survey, and then consider further actions to advance this. With that, Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to answer any questions, but we'll note that what we're looking for, I suppose, through this report is directors' interest in exploring the creation of an economic development service for your particular community, and also your interest in collaborating with the Chamber in respect to their rural business initiative. Thank you.
I'm going to start this one off, I think. I'm quite aware of this, been working with Tracy on it, but they're getting the funding through the Rural Economic Diversification Infrastructure Program. Is there a possibility of another tranche of funding coming out of that program? Does anybody know? Is it ongoing? And if it is, then why not do a similar thing in areas A and B.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, with your support, certainly I'd invite Tracy to advise on whether she's aware of, any kind of ability to submit further applications if it needs to wait to a subsequent year, or whether it could be put forward in the short term. But yeah, I agree that the existing work is being supported through that grant funding. And so if Tracy has any details on further opportunities, I'd welcome her to provide that.
I'm going to see her on Wednesday, so I'll ask her that question.
Well, I think she just unmuted herself, so. Are you there, Tracy?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh,
So
there is not on mute.
there is another intake for the REDIP grant, and that closes at the end of October.
And that's the last one, is it? Or do they?
That's correct.
Continue on to the federal election. Director Arbor has a question.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the information on today. In regards to REDIP, I think we have a project on Hornby right now happening. So it's good to see that those funds being freed up, and that's great to see the chamber work with Area C as well on that on this project. And I'll definitely be in favor to hear more about it at the committee level. In regards to the rural economic development service feasibility, I won't be interested in that service exploration. I think in Area A, I've been really clear that the biggest economic development opportunity in Area A is actually the infrastructure, the large infrastructure projects that we're working on. And it's already probably above what residents are able to absorb in terms of new costs. And then I'm really concerned as well around the discussions happening at the recreation and the intent to add another sheet of ice and a turf field and a pool. And those are all costs that don't bring as much benefit to Area A, but that we may have to pay the same as everyone else. So my appetite for new services that are not, that are not absolutely needed is low. I would say an economic development service. I mean, I used to be the economic development officer in Hornby, so it's not like I don't believe in that type of work. I get it. But keeping the eyes on the ball around our partnership with KFN and Union Bay Estates and not distracting ourselves with other work, I think is where it's at for Area A. It could change in the future if those projects proceed. Then there may be a high need for this kind of service to look at business attraction and support to existing businesses. And I really do value the work that the Chamber of Commerce is doing. I think when we were looking at the collapse of CVEDs, I was a strong champion of the board to try to onboard the Chamber as a really worthy organization to work with from here on out. But I just thought I'd provide that feedback to staff so that you can leave out Area A for now. And then when I was reading this report, it reminded me that one of the last actions of CVEDs on economic development in Area A was to facilitate the ship breaking business establishing in our area. So that was a nice close to that function at the time. And the legacy it continues to provide to us. So definitely if we do it again, we'll make sure that it's a much more grassroots supportive of existing businesses and rather than to try to hit home runs with things that we try to attract that don't really make sense for the area. Thanks.
Well, I have to agree with you that when you talk about economic development, once again, I mean, I know they say it shouldn't be a big driver, building houses, but we just had the previous report, and we've got all our capacity to actually increase housing is pretty well allocated to the growth nodes. We have a regional growth strategy that won't let anybody subdivide unless they end up with 2 4-hectare lots at the end of the day. And that's not ALR land. You add to that the complexities around the Agricultural Land Commission and then as I was alluding to as well, the fact that we're totally reliant on senior provincial ministries for to hold our hand through the whole process, because we're just the stepchildren of the province and we can't make our own decisions. But I know that we talk about the previous ACTEV, and I know Jeff Crawford did a lot of work out at Saratoga when they were doing, I guess, the second MDA for our amendment for the Saratoga Beach Estates. And that was only about 141 units in a strata. And they did a breakdown of all the economic development and benefits that would flow from even that. And we're not just talking about building supplies and excavators and carpenters. We're talking about all the spin-offs with businesses in Courtney and furniture and fixtures and cars and all the other things that go along with population. And it was tremendous, millions and millions of dollars in benefit. So by not allowing these things to go forward or not greasing the wheels and taking 20 years to get there, there's our economic development right there. I mean, I am biased. I did work in the building supply industry, so I say, that I know most of the I used to know most of the builders. I think their sons have taken over the business now, but yeah, I mean, it's subtle. People don't realize. And plus you got the added benefit of housing, which again ties into all the societal problems that we have. Housing first, and whatever it is, I guess, there's got to be some creative solutions out there. We got to find a way to get to yes, because there's 1,000 ways to get to no. Anyways, no use belaboring that. So we're still on receipt of this. Any more discussion on receipt? Seeing none. Any opposition to receipt? Don't see any. That carries. And the recommendation is basically to invite the chamber here for the report out, correct? Yeah, so that should be easy. Okay. Seeing no further lights. Anyone opposed? And that carries. Thanks, Tracy. And do we have lunch waiting? Do we want to have a working lunch or? Yeah. Okay, so we'll go fill our plates and stay tuned. And oh, I just lost my computer. Where are we at? We on 7? 8. And who's presenting on this one?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My note said that Doug DeMarzo is presenting, but rather than put Mark Harrison on the spot as acting, I think I'll ask Jake Martins to step in to cover this one, and Mark's agreeing, I think, with that.
That's why he gets the big bucks.
So Jake, presenting on the Denman Community Land Trust Association request for housing.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not sure why Doug's on there, but anyway, I don't want to take all the credit for this either. So thank you, James, and through the chair. Yes, this report responds to a delegation that the committee received some time ago, and specifically from the Denman Community Land Trust Association. They were seeking $10,000 to support an environmental investigation concerning an industrial property that is proposed to be donated to the group following the completion of their due diligence. So we've noted a little bit of background here in the summary report here, but just advising of the work that the trust has undertaken to explore the water and wastewater planning, subdivision rezoning, property delineation, and preliminary site planning, and then, as I mentioned, the environmental conditions. So this is the one outstanding item that the trust has identified as needing to be resolved. And so with this $10,000 support, they've advised that they would be able to undertake that. Through the report, we've looked at a few different options for funding this request, should that be the committee's desire, and identified 2 functions that we would advise as being suitable, that being the Denman Island Grant and Aid Service Function 123. Very broad purpose respecting this service, but there is funding available. The service only has $7,200 essentially remaining allocated funds, so you couldn't fund the entirety of this request should that be your desire, but you could fund a good portion of it. The other service we've identified is the Denman Island Economic Development Service, Function 555, which exists to support economic development on the island. And so the board has previously provided grants from this service, one in particular to support affordable housing. And the function does have available funds that could be utilized for this purpose. Based on this, we're recommending that the funds be split between those 2 services to support this prospective opportunity in which a valuable piece of property could be made available for a future development for affordable housing purposes. But we also want to just acknowledge that there's been a number of housing support requests from Denman Island. And so we have some current ongoing study work related to the direct action feasibility study that we feel will have bearing on this and other future requests. And so we look forward to receiving those results, getting board confirmation, and then determining how best these in the future can be considered and advanced. Mr. Chair, with that, I'm pleased to answer any questions.
And Director Arbor?
Yeah, thanks. The DCLTA has done really a great job in terms of advancing this new project, which would be additional to Denman Green. And I agree with Jake when he stated, the property that they're looking to secure is ideally located. It's also just across the road from Denman Green, and no, actually a little bit further down the road, sorry, but quite close to the hall and the center of the community. So another awesome site. And I think the staff suggestion with the recommendations is good. Spread it across the 2 functions and leave consideration of a service for the future, because I think when we talk about services, housing services for Denman, it will be probably in conjunction with service for Hornby potentially. There's been requests from time to time from Hornby for such service, all stemming back from 2014 when the islands opted out from the regional service. Thanks, and I hope the directors will support the request as well.
Any other comments? We are in receipt. Anyone opposed to receipt? That carries. Recommendations attached. Moved and seconded on the recommendation. Any further discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Anyone opposed? That carries. And from Denman Island to Denman Island Housing Association request for financial support. Moving second on receipt. And Jake's in the hot seat again, I guess.
Yeah, back over to Jake Martins for the introduction of this request for financial support from Denman Housing Association. Jake.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so this one is somewhat related in that it's, like you've noted, on Denman Island, and it concerns affordable housing, but it is distinct from the previous request that you've just considered. This report provides options and considerations for the request from the Denman Housing Association for ongoing financial assistance for the Denman Green Project and other affordable housing projects that may be undertaken in the future on Denman Island. We've detailed some of the background context respecting this, and this follows the direction that was provided at a previous EASC meeting for a report on the request. The Housing Association has been pursuing funding opportunities for Denman Green. It's a proposed 20-unit non-market rental development located, as Director Arbor just noted, nearby Village Center and nearby the property that we just discussed in the previous report. In 2023, the CVRD did provide a one-time capital contribution of $100,000 to the Housing Association to complete design work and produce a Class B budget. This essentially got their project into a shovel-ready state, which is required for most senior government housing-related grants. And the Housing Association certainly expressed their appreciation for that grant. Their subsequent application to BC Housing was unfortunately turned down. It was not successful, but they have continuing to pursue opportunities, and one has been identified through the CMHC and the Co-op Housing Development Program, as well as the FCM's Sustainable Affordable Housing Initiative. So together, these programs provide 30 and 50-year forgivable loans along with low-interest repayable loans for sustainable rental cooperative housing. The Denman Housing Association has developed a pro forma and an application associated with this opportunity. And as I mentioned, it looks to provide 20 new residential units of an approximate total budget of $14.4 million and would provide those units at below market and market rental rates through a cooperative housing model. And preparing the pro forma, the Housing Association identified a shortfall of approximately $100,000 in their gross income projections required to meet their mortgage liability and projected operating expenses. And so they are now seeking that annual grant from the CVRD in order to make up that shortfall. The request represents a significant commitment, both in terms of the potential total contribution to the Denman Green project, as well as the extended timeframe in which it would be undertaken through. And so staff have given consideration to this in the short amount of time we've had and identified a few considerations regarding that. The first is the service, which of course we've just discussed in relation to the $10,000 grant for the other piece of property. That is the Denman Economic Development Service. And while we have provided grants to now from that service for affordable housing purposes, the significant and long-term nature of this certainly raises question in regards to just addressing the very purpose of that service and making sure that we have that firm foundation from which to operate from in order to provide this type of grant. And so we've noted that elsewhere when, the regional districts have undertaken significant affordable housing projects, they've done that by enacting affordable housing services. And so that's one aspect we've considered. The other is formalizing this through some sort of an agreement or contract with the association. So while the board potentially could enter into an arrangement where you are just granting $100,000 each year, the nature of this proposal is that essentially without that $100,000 contribution each year, that could threaten the viability of the project. And so we would suggest strongly that there should be some sort of contractual relationship there between the two parties outlining the commitments. And in that respect, there are some legislative considerations regarding elector approval being potentially required if this agreement is deemed to be of a capital nature, which it may be, even though it supports operational funding. Lastly, I'll just note that the other consideration is what I've noted in the previous item, which is our ongoing work to explore and define the regional district's housing supports or affordable housing supports. And in that respect, we're looking at a direct action feasibility study that could result in the regional district creating an entity to support directly building and managing affordable housing. So we are certainly cognizant of the implications that this may have for Denman Island. Of course, that isn't determined at this point, and we recognize the unique considerations regarding both Denman and Hornby and the CVRD's actions. But for the reasons that I've noted here, we are recommending that we rate the receipt of that report prior to committing, and that, of course, direction would likely prevent or not allow an application to go forward for the September 15th deadline, which the association has noted. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to answer any questions.
Dr. Hardy?
Yeah, thanks. I did have one question with regards to the feasibility analysis showing that the total cost of the project to be around $14.4 million. You see it on the news every day that the cost for a project, you know, has increased from X amount of dollars, and now we have an increase of 20 to 30%. So I'm just kind of, again, going back, I guess the question I'm asking is, do we take into account contingency with regards to the cost of the project being, you know, based upon the date of the report at 14.4, and then you go to start up the project next year and it's the costs have increased by 30 to 40%. So just kind of wondering about that potential cost and increase. Thanks.
Thank you, through the chair. So I can't speak too intimately about the details around this project, given that that's certainly the Housing Association has been the one spearheading this. But what I can say is that they've developed a pro forma, and they've, of course, just recently got their project undertaken their due diligence around this project. So it's not significantly dated information from my perspective. And further, that their shortfall that they're experiencing is specifically in the kind of annual operational funding requirements in order to operate this, not in the capital construction part of it. That I think they would suggest that they likely have the funds ability to build the building and would incorporate appropriate contingency into that. But it's in their meeting their annual costs that they're challenged with, given that they can't increase their rental rates under the terms of the grant. So that's just a bit of the pinch or the rub that we're facing with this one.
You want to follow up?
So again, going back to that feasibility analysis and the cost of the project being 14.4 million. And again, the request for 100,000 for the operational side of things. If we run into this huge cost increase, is there potential for Denman Island to come back and say, hey, look, based upon our operational costs, like because of this increase in this cost, there's going to be a subsequent increase in our operational costs. So we're not going to be asked for 100,000 now. We may have to ask for 150,000, 175,000. So I guess it's just getting some clarity on potential for cost increase and if that comes back to ESC afterwards.
Yeah, thanks, and through the chair. So yeah, I think given the nature of this proposal in which we would be, you know, providing that injection of support, that the association has expressed to me their optimism around achieving other sources of funding to support this development as it moves along. But I can't commit at this point, of course, if they were to face a need for further financial resources, whether that would come to us, of course. Yeah, I'm reluctant to say that it necessarily would, but I think the possibility is certainly there.
Director Harper?
Yeah, thanks. So on last week, I provided a letter of support to the project for the application to CMHC and to FCM. And I got a letter, I guess, yesterday or this weekend anyways. I guess the association feels that we should be more direct in terms of our motion today. And they would like us to, ahead of their application, to present some kind of motion that confirms that the ESC in principle, would support $100,000 a year for this project. And I am not privy to their discussions with the funder. The letter I produced said that I would definitely sponsor to both this committee and the CVRD that sort of allocation should the senior funding be confirmed. And partly it's because you know, it is the role of the federal and provincial governments to fund these types of projects. And we have provided 100,000 to 2 projects as one-time contribution, but increasingly they're putting pressure on us, which is why we're looking at creating a regional housing service and all these things so we can participate in the pay-to-play kind of arena. But for this one, I could see like a valid point to kind of potentially commit those funds, but it's like almost like a chicken and an egg. And if my colleagues are willing, we could consider a motion like that. That is in principle. We usually don't do that, and I'm sure staff will caution us on that. But it's like, how strong of an intent do you want, or evidence do you want to show the senior government funder? My letter was very strong. It's clear that it's probably the most direct letter I've written in 6 years, where, you know, Denman Island has been abandoned in terms of affordable housing by senior government. We're seeing projects everywhere except Denman Island being funded, and it's their turn. They have the right site, they have a serviceable site, they have a good plan. It's ready to go. Fund it. But obviously on their side, they're hearing that, oh, you know, you need a bigger commitment in order to meet the 30 to 50 years terms or something like that. I don't think we can like expedite that much, but it wouldn't hurt perhaps either to just say that the ESC in principle is supportive of a possible $100,000 allocation, or even leave the possible out. But it's really hard to do a motion like that outside of our financial plan, in my opinion. So I'd be happy to hear both from staff and my fellow directors to see if we could consider something that is more committal.
Thanks, Director. And I know the challenge you identified there in considering this outside of the financial plan. This is a substantive request, not just in an annual payment, but an ongoing length of payments. So certainly there would be value in considering this in amongst the financial plan considerations. I think more importantly is the considerations around the service itself, and then the agreement that Jake laid out in the staff report and spoke to. And those two considerations that staff would certainly not be recommending support in principle because of those the uncertainty that those two particular topics speak to, the service and the agreement. So those are components that we would certainly want to be able to explore and have the time to explore. This is a request that came very, very much late in the day. So staff have not had, first of all, had the instruction from the EASC to undertake that work, or the ability to balance that into our work plan. But those are the couple of aspects I think that are most relevant in terms of staff's reluctance to suggest a support in principle type motion.
And in a way, whatever I do today, like, because I'm the only service participant, this is not actually an ESC decision. It's a full board decision for any kind of, when it comes to the vote, I'm the only service participant, right? So when it comes to a financial matter like that, when I have to have the full support of the full CVRD board being the only participant.
You're correct on the only participant portion, but I believe this is a delegated matter through the Electoral Area Services Committee bylaw. And so therefore it would be this body making such decisions. Unless it does have financial plan impact, which would require amendments.
Yeah, which is what I meant. If we were going to move the 100,000 contribution annual, I don't think that's a decision of the ESC. That would have to be through the financial plan and through the board. Yeah.
If we're into amending the financial plan, then that would be budget decisions to be made at the board level. You're right.
Right. Thanks for clarifying. I do have a question around let me think about this. Oh, you made a comment about the potential to create a service and then electoral assent. But we have provided $100,000 through the Denman Works function for housing in the past. So I don't think in the Local Government Act, there's such a thing as like an exception for one-time permit versus a year-to-year payment. So I'm just wondering if I can be more educated around if we're able to do one transaction for housing 1 year, why can't we do it for 30 years under that service? If we deem that that service was eligible to receive funds around housing expenditures.
Thank you through the chair. Yeah, I appreciate the question. And in this regard, you're right, the Local Government Act provides no caveat or exception for one-time expenditures. I think the context around this is that the service admittedly and recognizably is broad, and the definition provided in the bylaw provides no specificity whatsoever. And so in an effort to try and support the board's interests and the community momentum around some of these initiatives, we have, through a board resolution, sought to give ourselves a bit more comfort in that regard, that we feel like we have a foundation to provide this, but appreciating that the courts and the Local Government Act, the ultimate determination on this is the bylaw itself, and was there consideration given to affordable housing as part of the establishment of that service? And given it's a very dated service, it's certainly not recent. And so we would suggest that in entering into this type of long-term significant commitment, in order to reduce any kind of risk, that we'd want to have certainty around that service. Otherwise, yeah, there's risk in that could be challenged potentially if it was felt that the agreement was not covered by the service bylaw.
Can I have a follow-up? That's actually an important conversation because that determines whether we will need some kind of electoral assent process or not. So when you talk about risk, I understand that, but who would bring forward that risk? Is that in the experience of staff? Is that when a resident complains about something and uses the court system, or like, has the province ever cracked down on contributions in gray areas, if you will? Do you have, like, is there a long history of these things happening?
Through the chair, so my experience would be that that concern comes forward through the community, and then it's an action brought through the courts under judicial review proceedings or otherwise to challenge the validity of the instrument. In this case, it would likely be the agreement that we would enter into, and suggesting that it's not valid. So these are matters certainly we would want to explore with legal counsel if we were to go down that road. But yeah, generally it's I would suspect it would be through a court action that this could be challenged.
But just to add to that, to Jake's comments around the community interest, certainly we've got experience in working with the ministry on when ministry input is required on either service bylaws or agreements. Ministry is always quite mindful of the language in our service bylaws and authority and what has been granted to us, and our abilities to work under that structure. So I think it's twofold. There's a community interest as well as the ministry pays attention to these kinds of arrangements.
Okay, so thanks for that, CEO, for adding to Jake's comments. But I have a couple thoughts. One is I think we have amended a service bylaw in the past, just with director's assent. So if I wanted to clarify that in the bylaw establishment of the economic development function, that affordable housing is an eligible category, and confirm that through a bylaw, a minor bylaw amendment, is that opportunity exists, or do I have my history wrong around such amendments? And second, if the risk is a court thing by a residents or groups of residents for me. I know there's 80%. When we did the non-binding referendum on affordable housing contributions through Denman, there was 80% support for tax on Denman. People want to see this project happen. I have yet to meet a single resident on Denman who doesn't want it to happen. That's still not my question. I'm not trying to convince you of the public support for it. My question is, if somebody sued us, what's the penalty? Could I just then turn around and go to public assent to create a new service if we got caught that this didn't work as a risk mitigation?
So I'll answer the first part of your question, which I think was around the amendment to the service itself. So yes, an option here is that we create a brand new service, in which case it would be a given that elector approval would be required. In the case of amending an existing service, the option to do so through director consent is eligible. The ministry holds a bit of a hammer in that they can force it through an elector approval process should they desire that to occur. We've amended a number of services, and typically the ministry is just looking at the impact to the residents, both in terms of the nature of the service that we're amending, what we're taking it to. Is it a wholesale change? Is it very much different? And the financial impact to residents associated with that change. Those are kind of, in my view, the two big considerations. So yes, it is an option if we deem that that the economic development service seems reasonable, and we want to clarify or confirm within that bylaw that affordable housing or the provision of affordable housing is eligible, we could do that. The one, again, we're in this position right now in which we're very close, I think, to having some confirmation around the board's direction around our current sub-regional housing functions, and, you know, taking steps concurrently. You know, although we could look to try and remove issues, but certainly it could be a problem where we have then a sub-regional function that Denman contributes to that's undertaking affordable housing initiatives, and then we're also creating or establishing an individual Denman Island affordable housing function. So that's the type of kind of, perhaps from my view, chicken and sensitivities around this this immediate application deadline. The second part of your question, I think, was around refresh my memory again, the
court.
The court process.
If there's a penalty.
So the likely outcome here, if it did go down this road and we were unsuccessful, would be that the agreement would be quashed. And the main issue with that, of course, is that they rely on that funding as part of their project pro forma every year. And so if there's a gap or a lapse in that, I worry about the viability of that housing project. While, to your point, I think we could take steps then to try and create the necessary service, but any lapse, I would just be fearful of what the implications to that overall 20-unit building would be.
Yeah, very helpful. So if I may, I'm almost there. You know, I think in the earlier presentation on the housing needs assessment, we talked about reducing barrier and not being too risk adverse around solving the housing crisis. For me, it's not even close in terms of the minimal risk in pursuing, if we so choose, a contribution of $100,000 a year. And if residents squash it through, like, obviously, like, I would list that risk like so minimal that would happen. And second, if it happened, I know we could have an electoral assent process to reestablish the agreement and get the electoral support. The problem is exactly as you say, like, here we are with a deadline, and we're going with this most safe but ineffective, unsupportive resolution in regards to the grant, right? Because we're so scared of the risk on the other side, which is very minimal. So I would say, based on this discussion, I wasn't gonna, and I have an open mind because I wasn't gonna do that today, but I would propose that we actually, I would be prepared to move the resolution that was sent to me, which is that the ESC approves in principle and recommends to the Board of CVRD the provision of annual funding in the amount of $100,000 to Denman Housing Association if they are successful in their applications for senior government funding.
Mr. Chair, sorry, go ahead, James.
I appreciate the comments that you're making, Director, around the risk and the perception of that risk. I think it's incumbent on staff to present to the directors the legal framework that we have to work within in establishing a service. And I think Jake's done that quite well. And I would be hesitant to suggest that a path forward, a support and principle of sorts, can address these two pieces around the service and the agreement. We presented to you some of those risks that are identified and some of the concerns that we're raising. I think the support and principle, it brings those concerns to the table. And I don't know that that from the project perspective, it creates a viable outcome. What we are suggesting is that we use the direct action results to consider that as a possible vehicle. And if that isn't a vehicle, then we can come back and take a look at what would a Denman focused solution look like, appreciating that the September 15th deadline will have come and gone by then. So it's uncomfortable, I guess, in the sense that we have a recommendation here and a direction that you're suggesting that is in conflict with each other.
Director?
Yeah, that's a good summary. We all agree on everything. On the context, we just arrive at a different thing because at the end of the day, the recommendation that is here does nothing for potential $14 million application and confirming our support, which needs to go with that application. So all it does is it's lame support. There's not even a resolution around. I mean, I wrote the letter as an individual director because I can do that, but I think if the application necessitates a motion from the party, from the actual governing institution, then we are simply not providing that support ahead of that application. And having discussed the risk, which I don't know what my elected colleagues feel like, but I think the risk is very minimal to say that in principle, we support $100,000 a year in funding if the senior government comes through. And at that point, we haven't written it in the financial plan, but we have the resolution to put in motion afterwards what that entails if that motion helps lock in those senior government funds. Otherwise, I think we're taking a pass on this one. Like the current recommendation talk about the establishment of an affordable housing service, which I just learned that I can probably just propose an amendment that is director led to the existing economic development service. And quite frankly, I can get you an MLA support letter to go to the ministry with that. I can call Josie right now and she'd provide that letter. I think we're way too risk adverse on this one. And it's a time that Denman has been waiting for a long time. They have a significant application before two funding bodies that are credible and viable. And I think we should just let it rip.
Mr. Yeah, if I could just not so much in response, but just I think the other element here that's playing out clearly, and I think James mentioned it, is the limited time that we've had with this proposal, and certainly as you noted earlier, Beulah Creek has been funded, not with a annual contribution from Hornby Island residents, and so given our position in which we may be creating a housing entity and the level of contribution here perhaps could suggest that we want to have some form of partnership in this project potentially. And also, is this application the best approach to realize this development? Is there potentially another intake or otherwise in which it could be realized without $100,000 annual contribution in order to make this project viable? Of course, we have not looked at this in close detail. We've had certainly good conversations with the Denman Housing Association, and I really applaud their determination and their efforts on this. But yeah, it's a big ask with a very short timeline, and if we are going to go down this road, then the haste which we may find ourselves in may not result in the best arrangement potentially.
Hardy.
Just wondering, a question for the CEO is whether or not we can get legal advice on what's being put forward by Director Arbor and then what's being put forward by staff. If we can get that done in a timely manner.
I think, yes, we can always seek legal advice, and we have sought some consideration for some of these aspects, although as Jake says, in no great detail. We can always seek additional legal advice for the positions that we're taking. I think part of the struggle here is the deadline of September 15th, that application submission deadline.
And just a question regarding the recommendation with the service on Denman Island following the board's receipt of and direction concerning the direct action affordable housing feasibility study. So is that the Comox Valley Regional District Board, or is that East that we're talking about with regards to that receipt and direction?
So the Regional District Board will be receiving the direct action affordable housing feasibility study. It's been subject to strategic initiatives for a couple of meetings now. We anticipate that coming to the board. Jake, I think we're targeting end of September right now. So in fairly short order for that direct action affordable housing feasibility study at the board level. And then the intent of the recommendation here is that after the board has received that, if the direct action outcomes is an appropriate vehicle for this particular Denman housing initiative, then that could be a consideration for the board to pursue that. If the regional board-led direct action outcomes is not the right vehicle for something like a Denman housing project, then it would be back for the Electoral Area Services Committee to consider whether it be service changes, an agreement, whatever those considerations are.
I'm just wondering if there's some language that would bring a little bit of comfort to both sides. I think Director Arbor mentioned that upon successful application that CVRD would pursue a secure funding mechanism or something to that effect to guarantee that, you know, the continuation of support. Just something put in like that, because we've talked about it, that, you know, we can always go to plan B. I hate these deadlines that are like a week away kind of thing, but we're making a promise basically just to pursue options to continue funding, and we can just make that very plain in such a way that the grantors would realize that we're behind it, but this isn't the right mechanism, which is what's going on, right? So is there anything we can do wordsmithing to bring a little comfort to the housing association?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I wonder if I can pick up on that. I see Director Roberts' light is still on, but given the considerations around the service and the agreement and some of that due diligence that staff feel we do need to still undertake, any kind of letter of support and principle would, in our opinion, would have to reflect those considerations and that due diligence. And so we would want to explain that these are outstanding research items that would have to be resolved before full support could be given. Whether that achieves what you're looking for, I'm not sure.
But if we say we're pursuing it, isn't a guarantee, but it is a statement of intent to pursue. Yeah, it's not like we're just brushing them off. I'll let the director talk.
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, I'll just say that I won't be voting in favor of the current recommendation because there's so many, maybe like it's not a useful recommendation based on what the Housing Society is trying to achieve right now. It's not useful. And it's so that consideration be given to the potential establishment. Maybe we can add a maybe in there of maybe an affordable housing service on Denman Island following the board's receipt. Like, we're not sending that to CMHC, right? Let's all agree on that. That's not a supportive motion at all. So all it does is like kick the can at a time where I know the volunteers at Denman Housing Association, and they've spent the last 2 months, they've spent their summer working on this application, and they're all volunteers. And the professional advice I'm getting today is not convincing in regards to putting ourselves out there a little bit and the risk associated. The risk is minimal. I'll wear that risk. I'll make sure that staff is, you know, we are receiving our professional advice. It's also our role as elected official once in a while to say, if it's an acceptable risk, let's go for it. The application is due in a week. So I've sent to Lisa and James the wording of a potential motion I would like to table that comes directly from the volunteers at the Denman Housing Association, based on their belief that that motion would actually make an impact with CMHC. And I'm wondering if we'd be able to bring it up on the board so that we can have a more fulsome discussion on it. With your agreements, Chair.
Well, let's vote on receipt then. We can do that. We can agree on that. Anybody opposed to receipt? That carries. Now I'll move the recommendation as, well, you don't have to move it yet. Let's take a look at it.
Yeah. So this
Approved
resolution
in principle.
Yeah.
Just to confirm, would we remove the and recommend to the board of the CVRD? Given that this would be a piece of the delegated authority to the EASC?
Yeah, can you re-clarify around the financial plan aspect, whether it needs to pass ultimately the board, right, on financial planning? And I think because I'm the only service participant, they need to vote on it. Am I
Yeah,
right?
so because the financial plan is a bylaw, the board is the only body that can adopt bylaws. So if you're amending the financial plan, then the board would have to give 3 readings and adoption to the budget bylaw. A motion such as this, I feel would be delegated authority to the EASC. But Jake, if I've got that right, great. If I think I've got that right. This would be part of the delegated authority to the EASC. Nowhere in here does it suggest there would be an amendment to the financial plan, because we would need to undertake that
study
determination for the mechanism. And then it would be presented up to the budget if and when ready. But please, Jake, jump in here if there's something more.
Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, James. And the one thing that the association has made clear is that you know, this $100,000 contribution isn't required at the outset in order to construct. They have the at least according to the application, they've got the necessary financing in place for construction. It's the operation once it's built. And so while that does certainly buy us some time, I think the element here is that advancing this application forward to the federal government for approval, it potentially gets tentative approval. And then, you know, are we immediately taking steps to try and resolve these outstanding requirements, or are we waiting until we get that tentative acceptance from CMHC or otherwise before we then look to check these off? Either way, it's a protracted process on our part for sure, and there's no guarantee at the end of the day on whether we just certainly we can't guarantee it, but I think Director Arbor here is suggesting that we provide in principle or tentative support. Yeah.
Went further.
It's like that, isn't it?
Director, you're asking if we could do a letter of understanding, and I presume that would mean something between CBRD and Denman Housing Association.
Yeah.
We have experience with some letters of understanding, and some that they're typically instruments that compel both parties to undertake works or to do some sort of a commitment. We'd have to explore that with the Housing Association to understand what should be on the table in a letter of understanding. I can't think off the top of my head anything that jumps out specifically, aside from, in our case, the due diligence that we'd want to be performing. And I would imagine in any sort of exploration here, we would be working quite closely with Denman Housing Association to really understand the parameters at play. I'm not sure if a letter of understanding would be beneficial so much, but certainly it would articulate the roles.
Can I speak more, Mr. Chair? Okay. But
through a mechanism to be determined in the future, or it just sounds a little iffy, but you say this is their suggestion for a motion?
yeah, and I think your wording works better. As soon as a mechanism to be determined.
At a later date, or?
Yeah.
Or just determined, yeah.
Yeah. And if I may speak, what I think passing this motion does is it may be what, you know, like I'm sure I don't know, actually, I've never worked at CMHC, but they probably have criteria, right? And maybe one of those boxes is explicit support from a local government or a motion, like that's quite probable that they have that. So now that ticks that boxes. Later on, we hear that they get the funding. Okay, so now we come back and it gets real at this board and it gets real in our risk assessment. And there's still an opportunity to say, oh, actually that won't quite work or whatever. Like we're not, I don't think we're like tying ourselves to the faith and all the way to a court process. I think that what we're doing is we're willing to put money in if senior government is willing to put money in.
It's intent.
It's intent and it's strong intent. It's not like camouflage with probable and like maybe and it's a motion. It's an actual motion, right, of support. Yep, staff was.
Yeah, and just to confirm, I don't have the figures right here in front of me, but from what I understand, essentially as part of that pro forma analysis that the association has gone through, there has to be a certain financial viability test met in that application. And of course, without that $100,000 injection, they don't meet that threshold. With it, they just do. And so yeah, that's the pinch point. And of course, in respect to Director Arbor's comment about our next steps on this, that's the kind of clarity I think I was looking for is, you know, if we were to provide this letter of support, then are we immediately taking steps to try and work out the service and agreement that would be necessary, or are we then waiting for some feedback from CMHC to give positive signals that then gives us time also to work out our regional approach on affordable housing? And then should it be given the green or yellow light from CMHC, then we would then proceed with necessary or next steps in the exploration.
It's none of their gall darn business.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that could be like a subsequent motion so that this one gets sent clean to CMHC. And that I'd be prepared to move a subsequent motion along the lines of us exploring the best mechanism to support annual contribution for affordable housing on Denman. And that will allow you to look at the regional service. It would allow you to look at my suggested service amendment to the EGDEV service, like all the different pathways that we could potentially have to support this if the senior government's funded. Would that be considered good by staff to not to add it to this motion, but to do a second motion if this passes?
It provides the direction, I think. So yeah, it would allow us to explore all the different opportunities that might exist there for such a mechanism.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then speaking on the current motion, I mean, this will get distributed on Denman that this happened today if it passes. Don't worry about it. I'm gonna hear about it pretty soon. And the people who don't like it, I'm gonna hear about it. And I'm gonna hear about those who like it. And this is, again, currently only Denman residents would contribute to that with this commitment. It could change under the regional housing thing, but currently this motion doesn't tie up the regional hand at all, right? So. Okay.
Do we have to mention regional service at this meeting, or can we just put it as a notice to be worked on at a later date?
Yeah, I think when we do the second motion and we talk, well, we'll try to craft it so it's that we explore pathways to fund this. It could be Denman only, it could be regional, but it doesn't tie anyone's hand. It's going to be an exploration by our staff to see what would be. And then Jake had a question whether we start that work right away. I don't, we could wait to see if CMHC funds it. There's no urgency once this particular motion is passed. We can actually ease up. If we get funded, then we do the analysis.
Just have to warn everybody, I have a doctor's appointment at 2. So can we vote on that and shovel the rest down the road to the next meeting? Or, yeah, okay, so I'll call a question on that. Anybody opposed? Carries unanimously. Okay, so now we're on UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Funding application from our fire department. And I see Bruce is smiling in a little box in the corner of the screen. So over to CAO.
Thank you very much. Bruce Green is here to introduce the report on the UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund application. Bruce is our regional fire chief. So Bruce, over to you.
And first we should receive report. A second. But
go ahead, Bruce, over to you.
Okay, thanks, James, to the chair and the committee. Once again this year, the Union of BC Municipalities through the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund has offered up some funds for fire departments for training and equipment. It's noted that the equipment can't be big capital items. It's just ongoing small pieces of equipment that we need and training. In Appendix A, it's laid out what, with the consultation with the fire chiefs, where they would like to spend their money. One of the main things is most of the fire departments are looking at buying, I call it a decom washer, with cancer prevalent in the fire service. Having clean gear is something. So I think 5 of the fire departments are looking at buying decom washers as part of this grant. It's something that they're a $10 to $20,000 item, depending on the size. It's something we wouldn't be able to get if this wasn't this grant wasn't available. So we're looking for your support in applying for this grant. With that, I open up to any questions.
any questions of Bruce? You're getting thumbs up all around, Bruce.
Good,
Nice
I
to
can,
eat.
I can get out of the trailer now.
Well, then I think we're ready to go on receipt. Any opposed receipt? Seeing none, that carries. Moved and seconded on the recommendation. Seeing no lights on the recommendation, anybody opposed? That also carries. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And then where's our dashboard? We got to see our dashboard here. I'll copy down some numbers. Move second on receipt.
Mr. Chair, we do have our water restrictions dashboard. You've seen this on a monthly basis, just providing these updates on the various CVRD water supply and distribution systems. Staff are available if you have any questions specifically on this.
What's a cubic meter anyway? It's about this, by this, by this. Or 1,000 liters. Director.
I'm just wasting time now, but you know, I see for Royston, it's Allen Lake, which is pretty cool. That's the lake that provides for Cumberland, right? But there's two other little lakes, I think, that feed into Allen Lake. So it might be good to know the water level at those lakes. I'm just kind of kidding, but I'm sure in Cumberland, they would probably consider that. In fact, there's a discussion as to whether they would improve the dam on that second lake. But I would make it a serious point if we were not getting out of that water system, which I understand the next year or two we'll be on our way out of that system. But it's all I can say is this is detailed and it's great. It's going to be great when the trend kicks in, you know, in 2 or 3 years when we start to chart the trends and year to year. This year was obviously we were a bit more lucky with the waters, the precipitations.
Like the engineers say, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Okay, so on receipt, anybody opposed? That carries. And I believe Director Arbor, you've got a motion under new business.
Yeah, so briefly, just a quick motion to follow up with Craig, Derek, and their requests around the park. So my motion would be simply that we add to our work program investigation of a possible playground in Craig Derrick neighborhood. And I will leave it to staff to determine timeline on that, but definitely to update us on what a reasonable timeline may be.
Who's seconded? And no discussion. All in favor? I had to make it. That carries. Good, are you? Okay. Well, there's some dessert there. I may better take some home for the wife. Okay, termination for the nation. Thank you, everybody. Great meeting as usual. Good bunch of galleys and gals.